Hey guys, Ratha here. The new Settlers of Kalgur League just launched on Friday, and I've been pretty much non-stop playing all weekend. It's been a ton of fun, and I've got one hell of a build to share with you guys. This league, I wanted to challenge myself and make my own starter build, inspired by all the new changes to melee skills. There was one skill in particular that I thought kind of went under everyone's radar, as everyone was planning POVs with Earthquake, Ground Slams, and Bleed builds with Retaliate. But I was focusing on one skill in particular that I saw from the changes called Ice Crash, which actually got a pretty massive buff to effectiveness damage at like 590%. I think it got like about a double damage buff actually. I plugged it into POB and I was messing around with some of the potential items when I came across this beautiful piece of trash called Debian's Dirge. Now, nobody really ever uses this weapon ever, probably for good reason, but I know it's a very cheap weapon to buy and it's a pretty common unique to drop, so I plugged it in to see if it would be possible to achieve reasonably high damage output with Ice Crash on it. And I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. With all the new melee and Warcry changes as well as them adding this skill called Overexertion, this weapon would be groundbreaking in how much damage it could provide a melee slam build that uses elemental damage like Ice Crash does. It gives 150% increased elemental damage if you've Warcried recently, as well as movement speed and knocking back enemies, and a bunch of flat cold damage. So I thought it was perfect for Ice Crash, that is complete conversion to cold damage. As you guys can see, we're hitting well over 1 million DPS with this build, and with just some Dark Ray Vectors and a Debian's Dirge. At level 89 with Uber Lab done, which I actually did first try this league. Usually when I make my own starter builds, or even just any other starter build, I usually struggle with Uber Lab with a lot of builds. Either I'm just getting better at the game, or this build is actually pretty solid, because I did it first try. It actually went very well. But how does the build work? Where am I getting all the damage from? Let's break it down. I wanted this build to revolve around these basic concepts. Number one, use the trash unique axe called Debian's Dirge with the Ice Crash skill. Number two, stack frenzy charges with the Slayer Ascendancy node Masterful Form. As endurance charges were giga buffed this league, we have access to powerful defenses with them, on top of a bunch of attack speed and movement speed from frenzy charges. Since we're stacking frenzy charges, I can now benefit greatly from the support skill Ice Bite. Ice Bite gives a ton of flat cold damage with each frenzy charge, greatly powering up Ice Crash damage. And number four, we want to spam War Cries to create one massive hit of damage with Overexertion support skill, which they actually just recently updated POB with, so I can show you guys now. We're getting 17% more damage for each War Cry exerting them, and supported attacks also deal 10% more damage if exerted. Those are both multipliers of damage. So if we're running 4 War Cries that we're manually casting, that's 4 times 17 plus another 10%. That is a lot more damage. It's actually absurd. So going into the new league, I obviously had no idea if these things would actually work out, as I was building with new concepts and new changes that hadn't been tested yet. But to my pleasant surprise, they actually worked out just as I had planned. I thought spamming Warcries would be an annoying playstyle, but honestly, it's really not that bad with just some extra Warcry speed to make them function as near instant. It's kind of like buffing yourself 4 times before doing one massive hit, and potentially one-shotting everything on screen, if it crits. I find myself sometimes killing map bosses in just one hit, and if I don't kill them in one hit, I at least almost guarantee a freeze on them with Ice Crash having pure cold damage. So if I do manage to freeze them, it actually opens up the possibility to rebuff myself and then hit them again and potentially kill them with the Headsman node from Slayer, which has Cooling Strike at 20% life when hit by your skills. So our first hit, if it doesn't kill them, it'll freeze them, keeping them from moving. We can rebuff ourselves, use the crit tincture, hit them again, and then they're pretty much guaranteed die then. Now, the build does achieve great damage with just a 5 link. You can get up to 1 million DPS, but still, for the sake of the video, I wanted to buy a 6 link Debian's Dirge, just so I could see what the skill ceiling, or the I guess the damage ceiling for 6 link would be like. Now, you could just buy a Debian's Dirge for like 1 chaos and upgrade it yourself, 6 link it yourself when you have enough currency. I think that's really awesome that the build is capable of doing that. But I was impatient and I wanted to see how much damage it could do with the 6 link. There was sadly only one on the market and it was going for 1 divine, which is a ripoff. I should not have bought it. I don't recommend anyone buying a 6 link one. You can do just fine with a 5 link one. But if you need to, you can buy one pretty easily. So I bought this for 1 divine orb since I had one on hand. So currently my budget for the build is like 1 divine orb and like maybe 50 chaos. It's pretty simple. A very, very, very budget build. Even the dark ray vectors I actually just got off the ground. I've gotten 2 of them now, so it's pretty common to get them. The links I'm currently using in the 6 link that I found that work out best are Ice Bite, Inspiration, Pulverize, Fist of War, and Overexertion. Now, you could use different things depending on how you want to play. Like, for a while I was running elemental damage with attack support instead of Pulverize. So I didn't have to deal with the low attack speed, but I found with 6+ frenzy charges, the attack speed reduction is nullified just from having the bonuses from the frenzy charges. What about in our chest piece? Well, in our chest piece, I'm actually currently running a 5 link. And the reason why you want a 5 link is because you want to have 4 of your war cries with an urgent order support gem, because this gives increased war cry speed. This makes it all the war cries almost instant, and it makes it feel very good to pop them. If you don't have urgent orders, it kind of sucks. And if you only have a 4 link, you'll pretty much only be able to run 3 cries and then urgent orders. With 4 and urgent orders, you get even more damage. So I highly recommend doing a 5 link setup with your cries and then urgent orders. You can also run an auto exertion with another war cry that you just want the exert buff from. If you run auto exertion, the war cry buff doesn't do anything. You don't get a buff from it. So in this case, for Infernal Cry, we don't get the explosion deals. Well, actually, we do get an explosion, but we don't get the buff grants 5% physical damage, extra fire damage per 5 power. We don't get that. But we get the exertion on the next 6 melee attacks, and we get the exerted attacks trigger combust the first time they deal a melee hit, which is really awesome. And since we don't run a lot of reservation nodes, this does reserve 15% of our mana, I believe. Yeah, 15% reservation override. We're not running Hatred, which would be best in slot for us normally, but they nerfed it last patch. It doesn't give as much damage. I plugged it into my build, and tooltip damage only went up by like 3,000. It was really bad. So I'm not even bothering running Hatred. We pretty much get a free Hatred buff with a level 20 quality Ice Crash, which gets 15% of physical damage as extra cold damage, which is the same thing that Hatred does, I believe. So we don't need that shit. Instead, we can run an auto exertion. We're only reserving like what 40% of our mana. We have tons to work with. The reason why I'm not reserving more mana actually is because we are running a tincture, and tinctures are insanely powerful for this build, especially the one I have right now, because I managed to get one with crit strike chance with melee weapons at 150% with 90% increased effect, and melee weapon damage penetrates 13% of elemental resistances, which is amazing for this build. As you can see, it's giving like 30% average damage and 30% hit DPS. It's kind of insane to have this. So you want a lot of mana to work with the mana burns, so that you don't have to constantly be toggling the tincture on and off. All right, it is very important to note though, with overexertion and the war cries that you choose to use, you have to make sure that the skills that you're using can be exerted by the war cries that you choose. Some war cries only exert certain things. For instance, if we plug in Ancestral Cry here, Ancestral Cry is really awesome. It got a huge buff where it gives you 5% all res per 5 power, and then also +1 all max elemental resistances per 10 power. It's counting up to 30, so you get +3 max all res. It is an insanely good buff, but the exertion only works on melee strike attacks, and Ice Crash is a slam, and so is Ground Slam, so is Earthquake. You cannot use Ancestral Cry for the exert on those skills. You can only use it for like Glacial Hammer or something, right? So if you are running Ancestral Cry, You aren't getting the 17% more damage exertion from auto or overexertion, but you can still run it just for the buff, which I would recommend. So yeah, Seismic Cry exerts next 6 melee slams. Intimidating Cry exerts 2 melee attacks with double damage. Seismic Cry also gives AoE, which is awesome. That's why I'm running it. I'm using Battle Mage's Cry for the next 5 melee attacks you perform exerts. We don't really need the it triggers a supported spell, right? We don't really need that. I guess if I get another 6 link, I could put a spell in there just for that, but we're mostly just doing it for the crit strike chance buff, and the next 5 attacks are exerted. And then we're also using Rallying Cry, which gives an attack damage buff, which we don't care too much about. I just want it for the melee attacks are exerted. All right, some other additional things that we are using on the skill tree, though, are an accuracy node. You want to try to get some accuracy somewhere, because if we don't have it, you can see our hit chance just drops pretty low. You are going to need some accuracy. So I highly recommend taking one of these nodes and then just doing the accuracy master, which is like 500 accuracy rating and -2 per level. At max level, we'll still have like a net positive like 300 accuracy. So it's pretty worth using. You can also just get accuracy on gear if you need to. And we also have it with precision. Precision gives you accuracy and crit strike chance. Really good to use for the build. We're all using blood and sand for an area damage buff while in blood stance, which is pretty nice. And then I also have a molten shell set up with cast damage taken just for some damage reduction when things get too rough, and a defiance banner for spell suppression in boss fights, which is really nice, as well as movement speed. So if you don't have a lot of movement speed for some reason, you know, you can pop this, you can move around like crazy. It's pretty nice. I also have a mark on hit set up with Assassin's Mark and Leap Slam on life tap, of course. Actually, life tap also affects the Assassin's Mark cast, which is cool. But you could run Warlord's Mark if you'd rather have endurance charges. I like Assassin's Mark because we're trying to go into crit right now, so having power charges and the crit hit chance and multiplier against cursed enemies is just really, really beneficial for my build. But if you are struggling to get endurance charges, you could use Warlord's Mark instead. And on that note of endurance charges, let's go into defensive layers, which honestly, with the build, are my biggest issue right now. I'm still trying to work on my defenses. I am capable of pushing red maps with this build, and I even cleared Uber Lab with my first try, but we do have some issues with it. As I said before, a big defensive layer is just the 8 endurance charges that we generate off this node. Masterful Form. So we have 8 max frenzy charges, which we get through the build. We have one here, we have one up here, and then we have one from our Dark Ray vectors, as well as from my necklace enchant, my amulet enchant, which is currently allocating frenetic up here. That means 8 frenzy charges and 8 maximum endurance charges together. You could use something like Enduring Cry to generate them if you need to, just by the way. But we also have these nodes down here. Disciple of the Unyielding, which gives us 1 minimum endurance charge and chance to gain them on kill, along with increased damage, AoE, stun duration, armor. This is really useful. I highly recommend getting this if you don't have a way of generating charges, or you just want some extra bonuses for them. So the reason why we want endurance charges is that it gives us a lot of physical and elemental damage reduction now with the new changes that they made. Now it's giving us less, like, reduced damage taken from elementals, so it stacks with resistances, so it's really strong right now for elemental hits. I also stack armor, which at first I wanted to do both armor and evasion. I actually had a lot of armor and evasion on the tree and everything, like with these nodes over here. Problem was that I was getting stunned a lot, and the only way that I could really figure out how to get rid of stun was through Unwavering Stance, which makes it so that we cannot be stunned, but we also cannot evade attacks. So in turn, I went Iron Reflexes for the time being, converting all our evasion rating to armor instead. We do have a lot of dex, so we would have benefited a lot from evasion rating, which kind of sucks that we can't evade, but it is what it is. Until I find a way to get rid of stun, which really fucks us up if we get stunned while trying to get all our casts out. It sucks, trust me. But once I fix that, I solve that, I can get rid of this. We can get rid of these. We can go back into evading stuff. It'll be pretty nice. But, you know, physical reduction is really nice, especially with the endurance charges. We are always at like 90% reduction, which is really important. We're taking a lot of small hits and stuff. This won't help us against any big hits that are elemental or chaos based. We will just get one shot by them. As you can see with our max hits here, we have like 41,000 elemental max hit thanks to maximum endurance charges, or sorry, maximum elemental resistances like prismatic skin and stuff, as well as this node here for armor mastery. Now we also utilize leech in this build. I'm just taking these 3 nodes here. This gives us a lot of leech. We're looking at like a fourth of our health, maximum health being leeched. It's like 1100 versus 4000. You could also grab the 100% increased recovery. I don't even know if that actually works. You could also grab some instant leech, which I probably would recommend instead. I don't take Vol Pact because I noticed it actually gave me less leech, although it would be instant. So it's like every time we hit something, we just get a bunch of health back. I think it's better to have some staggered leech instead, because in certain situations you might not want instant leech. You could also technically get rid of these 2 nodes and grab these for overleech for survivability's sake. But it's really nice having the cooling strike, especially if you're trying to one-shot things. It helps a lot. Like we get 300,000 cooling DPS here. That's actually huge. And later on, if we get some better weapons and stuff and better multi-crit chance, that could end up being even more than that. All right, so now let's cover some of the build weaknesses, which there are a few of, but a lot of them are manageable and solvable ones. But currently I can't solve some of them. So the biggest weakness comes down to a personal preference in the playstyle. You do have to utilize a piano keys type playstyle where we hit 4 war cries, then we use a tincture in order to do the most amount of damage possible. I know this isn't everyone's cup of tea for how to play the game, but I used to hate it myself, and I'm starting to enjoy it a lot more when I'm playing this build, because I feel like I'm rewarded in one-shotting bosses when I do set up everything correctly, right? Before, with melee skills, they weren't doing a lot of damage, so even if you were to do this piano keys warcry thing, you wouldn't really get rewarded for it. It wasn't worth it at all. Now I feel like it's way more worth it to do this. It feels really good when you get the big hit off, takes up the entire screen, and then kills everything. It's really nice. And even if we don't kill everything, we get some reliable freezes with Ice Crash. Now, there is another big issue, which is probably my least favorite issue with this build, which also prevents us from being able to be effective in boss fights without any ads, is that we don't have any way of generating charges outside of killing monsters. Charges are important to this build. If you don't have those frenzy charges, then you don't have a lot of attack speed and your swings are too slow. You also don't have any move speed. If you don't have endurance charges, that's a lot of your defenses down. So right now, the only way we can generate charges are from killing monsters, especially with like Blood Rage for frenzy charges and this node for endurance charges. Now, this is a problem that is completely solvable if we get the right gear. Like if we get Ralakesh's boots, those completely solve this issue because we always have our maximum charges. Problem is, those are like over 20 divs right now. It's pretty much impossible for me to get them at the moment. But hey, we can at least farm for them by mapping. Another thing we can do is to take off the Ice Bite gem. Ice Bite gem is giving us a lot of our damage. If you uncheck it here, you notice we lose like 400,000 DPS. But you can put in a Hypothermia. Hypothermia will give you like almost as much damage, like 30%, 20% or so. That's because we're chilling on hit with Ice Crash, cold damage, and support skills deal 29% more damage with hits against chilled enemies. So Hypothermia is a really good way to do damage against bosses if you don't have charges up. Another 2 ways to solve this issue is with the Redeemer body armor modifier for 10% chance to generate frenzy charge on hit. To solve endurance charges though, we can either take a node on the passive tree for charges when you get hit, But that would also require you to get hit by things that could potentially kill you when you don't have the charges up. So I think a better way to do it would be to sadly replace our weapon, shaper influenced item, 8% chance to gain endurance charge on critical strike. That's what you want to get. If you can get that and transition fully to crit chance, you will be generating endurance charge like crazy. Because if you have 100% crit chance, you're always critting, you're always generating charges on 8% chance. It should help a lot to generate those without Ralakesh. So that is one way to solve the issue. For now, I can really only recommend playing this build as a mapping build because of these issues with charges, which I'm trying to seek some solutions, and I'll probably make an update video if I do manage to solve them. But if anyone has any suggestions for generating charges outside of killing things, please leave a comment and I'll check them out. Some additional things to note for the build, especially when it comes to war cries on the passive tree, is that it's really important to take these masteries. You want to take a mastery for Warcries cannot exert travel skills if you're using anything that benefits as an attack, like I'm using Leap Slam. So Leap Slam could be exerted by a bunch of them, or if you're using like Whirling Blades or something. If you're using like Dash, you don't really need to worry about it, right? But if you're using Leap Slam, take this mastery. I also found it helpful to have the Warcries have a minimum of 10 power in case you're not near any enemies or you're unable to generate a lot of power. You'll always get some kind of buff from your Warcries if you take this, even if it's just a minor buff. It's helpful when you're like too far away from a boss as well and you're trying to rebuff before one big hit. If you have the currency, you could buy an Exert Cluster Jewel, like the one in my other build over here that I was planning before the league launch. We have this Cluster Jewel down here, which small passive skills grant exerted attacks deal 20% increased damage. Really awesome. And then you can also get Warcry nodes from this. This one's called Warning Call. It gives you 25% increased armor per 5 power for 8 seconds when you Warcry, up to a maximum of 100% armor. That's huge if you manage to get enough power. You can also get Lead by Example. When you Warcry, you and allies gain Onslaught for 4 seconds. This is really good if you don't have these nodes over here. That just kind of give you Onslaught on kill. If you do end up going this direction, you can kind of get rid of these nodes. I have them on my other tree. It is worth to note, though, that the Mastery here is really powerful with this build. 8% increased evasion rating per frenzy charge, 8% armor per endurance charge. We have 8 charges. That's a lot of bonus armor and evasion rating. So you might want to keep this. Just by the way, it's pretty useful. I am currently transitioning into full crit on my other build, or on my current build, right? So right now the damage isn't even as high as it should be. Let me show you guys what it looks like when we do have all of our crit. So firstly, I want to grab these up here soon, get more crit. We have these down here. You also get some crit multi right here. So with near 100% crit chance, we're already at like 2 million from like the 1 million we had. And if I were to get some gear with some crit multi up to like 400, 500%, it'd be even greater. On my other build, I actually have that planned right now. On this build, we have 461% crit multi and 100% crit chance with some pretty reasonable gear. Even without the replica abysses, we're already looking at like 5 million damage instead. This is with like diamond rings, with flat cold and Stygian bias with elemental damage, global crit multi jewels. Nothing too crazy. Just stacking as much crit multi as possible will give you tons of damage. So there is more of a ceiling to this build than what we currently are achieving. So where did we go from here with the build? Well, if you wanted to do so, you could pick up a replica Abyssus for insane elemental damage, like I was just talking about. If I equip this right now, you can see my damage goes up to like 2.5 million. It's pretty useful. Problem is you take like 40 to 50% increased elemental damage, so it's kind of hard to sustain. I did test it myself. I did buy one and test it. I was dying a lot, but I was doing even more damage. I felt like I was actually one-shotting everything. I am going to try and get a new weapon, such as the one with the percent chance to get charged on crit hit. You could get one with just like a bunch of added cold or physical damage, some percent fizz, crit chance multiplier. You could get now there's a whole bunch of things you could do. Leaving it open end is pretty nice. And then obviously later down the line we could get a rune crafted one with like the percent damage as extra of all the elements. That would be insane for this build. Also look into getting an exceedingly rare replica's feral fur, because that would actually solve our charge problems with ease. As you gain up to your maximum number of frenzy endurance charges when you gain cat's agility. I believe cat's agility is on like I think it's like a 4 second duration, 8 second cooldown or something. I don't really remember, but it should tie into your charge duration like perfectly. Like you won't run out of charge duration before it procs again, I believe. So this pretty much solves that if you can't get your hands on a Ralakesh's boots right now. If you can manage to pick up one of these, it'll help a lot. As a closer, I'd like to reinforce again that this build is terrible in its current state for any bosses outside of a map, as it needs charges to work. It is mostly a bossing, or it's mostly a mapping build. Don't try to do any like pinnacle bosses, like don't try to do your Searing Exarch or anything with it. It's gonna be kind of rough without the charges, unless you find a way to deal with them. If you do get Ralakesh though, I mean you're set. This build should pop off like crazy. And I've had so many oh shit moments in maps where I just slam down and obliterate the whole screen. It's really fun. If you like the video and you'd like to see an update and potentially more builds in the future, please consider hitting that subscribe button and liking the video. My goal for the past year has been to hit 500 subs on YouTube, but despite getting thousands of views on my videos, I'm still only at like 200, so it would help out a lot. Thanks, guys. Have a great league. See ya.